we've got all of Kroger's data in the US and we're figuring out new ways of understanding customers with that.
AI is still really in the experimentation mode, and people are really nervous about it.
Using AI and especially agentic in these solutions to sit agents on top of each of those sub processes and different models.
Perfection is enemy of the good. Hi, everyone. Daniel Kube here. Another interesting discussion for Executive Conversations. And today I have Brock Simon with me. And I had the great benefit of meeting Brock a couple weeks ago, actually out in San Francisco at the Usage Economy Summit that Logisense had put on. And he and I started speaking about our careers, our backgrounds, and what's going on in the pricing and usage-based world. And Brock has some really interesting takes on it. And he's been doing some really interesting work in the trenches, helping organizations globally to find their futures related to these things. But, I always like talking about your background and how you got there, Brock. And I'd love for you to share, because you've actually had a pretty interesting journey, worked for some really cool organizations. And, and it seems that you constantly have enhanced your expertise with every organization you went to. So it'd be kind of cool to talk about how you've managed to do that, because, that's a hard thing to persist.
Well, yeah, happy to, Daniel. No, because I had the advantage of starting my career. I mean, I studied mathematics and stats and that in undergrad. And at the time, there was kind of options of, I saw a lot of people going into academia or going to actuarial work. And I got lucky enough to find a company, dunnhumby, that was doing, they were just, at the time said, we've got all of Kroger's data in the US and we're figuring out new ways of understanding customers with that. And that, sounded really compelling and something where you could learn a lot and do new things. And so I had the opportunity to start with them very early on when they were first starting to work with Kroger in the US. And then also had the opportunity, as dunnhumby was originally working with the loyalty programs with Tesco in the UK. Tesco loved what they were getting in terms of insights to run their business, the data monetization opportunities for insights, as well as the targeted media, and wanted to expand globally. So got quite a few opportunities to move to Thailand and set up dunnhumby Thailand with Tesco Lotus, run the dunnhumby business in Turkey for a while, and then run solutions and analytics for Tesco across Asia with dunnhumby. And so it was, that first part of my career was really fascinating because it was all doing consumer data science insights. Eventually, it started being similar things in new places, but really loved my career there. And then had the opportunity to, get into consulting, where a headhunter contacted me about McKinsey. Didn't really know much about the consulting world, but the model of, hey, we can kind of figure out any problem with really smart people and the right technology and the resources that McKinsey had sounded like a really interesting next chapter after 10 years of doing those kind of consumer analytics. So spent some time with McKinsey. I was, working in China when I first talked to them. I said, hey, there's more of this kind of work in the US. Spent 2 years in the US, but almost as soon as I got to McKinsey in Chicago, started talking to them about, hey, there's some opportunities with some of these big conglomerates and folks back out in Asia. So went from, 2 years in Chicago back to Bangkok and spent a lot of time then really broadening and working with different conglomerates that were struggling with, hey, we've got retail, but we also have telco data. We've got different information from our financial service businesses and streaming services and all of that. And so I got to use a lot of those, focusing on the customer data science techniques, but in broader, wider sets of data. Really enjoyed that time out in Asia. And then more of personal reasons, everything else, decided to join Bain and move back to the US. And so in that time, I've been based in San Francisco. And really, the most exciting thing was just having the opportunity to work with so many of the leading edge technology companies. So with Bain, we had a pretty early partnership with OpenAI. So I got to go through the whole Gen AI to agentic to everything else. And that's where I started leaning back pretty heavily into retail the last year or so, building out a lot of these agentic opportunities. Because I found there was just so much that was really hard in the data science, understanding world of retail, that now that complexity could get simplified or automated in a lot of ways when we, working with these new agentic reasoning models and those kind of systems.
Yeah. So given the fact that you've worked, pretty much all over the world, how different are the patterns? You use the common pattern, set of patterns to analyze the different purchasing behaviors in different countries to optimize, purchasing and buying. But how radically different, or are they different? And because, that sort of takes us to this new world of AI where hyper personalization is going to be possible. Not there yet, but I mean, it will be there, especially with outcome-based solutions and things like we were talking about in San Francisco. What have you seen that sort of persists and remains the same in these patterns, and where do you see a lot of change?
Well, it was interesting because I've learned where it's different, how to adjust those things a lot over time. I remember first going from when I was with dunnhumby and we were taking the models that we had used and in terms of like the segmentations and the real approaches of, hey, how do we understand a loyal customer in terms of how much they're buying, how frequently they are, how many different categories they're working with. And let's like lift and ship some of those models over to Thailand and other places in Asia where the buying patterns are really different. And what I found was people do just shop and think about things very differently. Like different consumer behaviors in different parts of the world are very different. Like, if you don't have a car and are buying, used to buying daily needs from a wet market, the way you purchase even from big retailers looks completely different than if you are in the US versus Europe or other places. And so what I found was a lot of the parameters and how you think about it, and we had to rewrite a lot of the segmentations, approaches, and models to make it work. However, more of the approach of, okay, well, how can I look at these different metrics to predict and look at like what actually makes customers stickier and then back into how do I set the parameters and get meaningful segments off the back of it was really important. And I think that still really translates a lot is like the behaviors are always different. However, if you're taking enough of a first principle approach, optimizing for what you really care about, whether that's sales, margin, customer loyalty, and think about it in the right way, you just design those systems around it and can flex for the different country and cultural differences.
So in some of these markets, the proliferation of cell phones actually happened a lot faster than in North America.
Yeah.
Did you take any of your learnings from these markets and apply them in North America after the fact? Because we always think we're on the cutting edge here, but in a lot of ways, some of these markets, I would say even like Africa are light years ahead of our adoption in certain markets.
Yeah. Well, and especially years ago when I was doing a lot of that work with dunnhumby and even out in Southeast Asia, maybe 5, 6 years ago with McKinsey, the opportunity to digitize personalized experience was incredibly different. Because again, when we originally, like with dunnhumby, we were taking a lot of the Kroger Tesco model for personalized offers, which was still, I mean, this was back like 20 years ago, it was still like coupons in the mail. Yeah. Around like, hey, these are the products you bought. Here's how we'll stretch your spend in 2 different ways. We took that out to Asia at first. We're like, this just won't work. Like the post works differently. I mean, I was running the Turkey market for a while. We were mailing these sets of coupons to different consumers and then realized it wasn't even getting to the right people at all. Like it just, wasn't working. However, high mobile phone use, high smartphone use, like let's get, different offers to print out at the register and at the checkout. And so we really did have to first like adapt really quickly to, hey, this isn't going to use the traditional channels we had before. And it also gave us an opportunity to experiment. Like I really enjoyed working in Southeast Asia for the ability to run those digital personalization models a lot earlier. So even when we were running things with with dunnhumby, the first places we were doing a lot of really deep personalization wasn't necessarily the US and the UK. It was out in South Korea. It was out in Thailand where we did have that kind of digital adoption, willingness to take some risks and do something new. And that's why it was a really exciting place to go work and get to build some of that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so, rolling the tape forward, we're sort of in a similar situation, but I would argue like AI is still really in the experimentation mode, especially at the enterprise level.
Yeah.
And people are really nervous about it. And you and I have had some discussions about the importance of making sure your pricing is absolutely accurate, but you want to leverage the power to do this crazy personalization and assembly of information to have real impact to drive an outcome. And also, creating new solutions is faster than ever, right? Your ability to potentially morph to a market need can be transformed literally in hours and days now versus weeks and months, creating a solution set or a buyer's guide or whatever that may be. What is your advice to organizations that are trying to take their first steps to understand what they can do and what they should be doing, like when it comes to offering solutions and pricing new things in the market? And I know you've got a lot of B2C, but if you could maybe flip some of those analogies into a B2B world, that would be cool too.
Yeah, well, I'll start with B2C and then ask you some other questions. I don't cover B2B enough because like what I've seen a lot as it is moving very, very quickly and some of it is experimental, but it's still using the same workflows and processes we've always used. It's just now you have tools to help synthesize, access data, remind people of best practice and how they're thinking about things in ways that you didn't have before. So, for instance, like with B2C, like pricing solutions within retail, we've been looking at things like price optimization models, competitive matching, different price integrity rules about how those different products fit on the shelf for forever. That's always been the case. Mm-hmm. However, what it used to look like is one individual sitting there looking at my price optimization, base price dashboard, my promo dashboard, and maybe golden rules about frequency and timing and mechanics of how I'd look at it. Then I checked my competitive matching and my price indexes and what did the competitors run on prices next week. How does this impact things like bigger pack, better value, and differentiation between prices and brands? And all of those rules were already there. But, and it's not, and there was sophistication in each of those models, but there was real complexity on how do you integrate it? Because at the end of the day, you still have to charge like one price. Like something has to make it to the shelf. I mean, maybe it's five prices depending on the yellow, white card, everything else you might get at retail. But you know what I mean? Like you still have to make a real decision. And where I'm finding the power of this is just using AI and especially agentic in these solutions to sit agents on top of each of those sub processes and different models and help you synthesize and think through, okay, what are the real trade-offs? So when you are breaking some of those rules, because you have to, there isn't usually a perfect solution set between optimization and matching and different price integrity rules. But now you can do that with a lot more intention and really know this is why you're doing it, record those decisions, make better decisions and options in the future. And I think that's what I'm seeing even a lot on like the B2B side, because even if you don't get the high frequency of data, sometimes it's a little harder for optimization models and other ways of thinking, but being able to synthesize across and get quick information on, hey, what is optimal based on my internal metrics? What is going on in the competitive market, how things are pricing? What are the implications, and running scenarios really fast on, hey, if I charge in this portion of my SaaS model or fee, whether it's like seats or usage or anything else, I still think that like ability to be able to synthesize and keep best practice across those what used to be completely disparate solutions really helps a lot. But it's in my mind, it's not necessarily that experimental because we've been using all those inputs already. It was just completely up to a person to synthesize it and keep best practice in their mind as they were looking at all those different inputs.
Yeah, one of the things you shared when we were on the phone last week was just the velocity on doing POCs, and the ability to deliver solutions now is just game changing. How has that rubric changed for you over the past 10 years? Because it used to be a bunch of people, probably with spreadsheets. Then you probably build some models or some OLAPs. Like, what does it look like now?
Yeah, I'll kind of compare the way it looked back from dunnhumby days to what we're building now, where it's just a much faster process. Because I remember a lot of times with dunnhumby, we had what we called the shop, which was, hey, these automated reports based on different questions that you would use. But the way we would develop those is really listen to different CPGs, different retailers, figure out what are their questions. It would usually start with an ad hoc report and certain kinds of insights. And if we heard that question common enough, we'd go through and say, okay, this is like worthy of all that time and development cycles to really build a final report. And so if you think of what that meant it was a lot of figuring out like the right analytics, doing things highly manually, then designing some sort of like question-based workflow to then finally give an answer to a very sharp, specific question, and you build a dashboard around it. But in that world, what it led to was all these disparate dashboards and silos, and someone would have to ask all those different questions, synthesize it themselves, and we'd write PowerPoint, presentations and guidebooks to be able to do it, but it was all very separate. Now I'm just seeing that dev cycle is completely different because for one, it's much faster now to build a agentic front end UI UX experience, get a prototype in front of someone early. And so like this development cycle of, hey, I have an idea. I want to see this data differently. I have an existing model, but I want to be able to interact with it more. I want to synthesize across these sources. I don't go through the process so much of, hey, let's do this ad hoc and figure out the perfect thing. I'll start and quickly code up a prototype, get it in front of users, get people to experience and test it, find out what's not quite working, and then add and develop from there. And that's a completely different development cycle and approach than the, hey, we really need to get the design right all the way through, because it just took a lot longer to code and build all the components.
Have you started using like synthetic roles yet with your agents? Like, the be mad method, for example. I don't know how familiar with it, but I mean, it seems to me really quite powerful and crazy all at the same time. But I mean, we're trying to bounce around it because it's a great way to deal with legacy code and integrate like change and add value very quickly, especially as you merge the two worlds together. Like, how are you going about that?
What, in terms of like the structure of how we
Are you
think
actually
about
building like an agent for a pricing agent and like a product owner and for example?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes like a lot of the ones I've done, it might not be like exactly specific types of roles, but making sure it's really clear, because everything I've been doing now with a lot of this is kind of started, if you think of the different layers, is, hey, there's different MCP, A2A, like tooling on top of the different data sets. There's different like knowledge layers, which I think is the closest to what we're saying of like different users, where it's, well, how do I think about price? So yes, I have agents on top of, like I was describing before, your optimization models and the data and information, your competitive matching, your different pricing rules. But you still need that more of like an expert lens, knowledge, best practice to be able to, how do I interpret across them? And then, you've got different ones where it's like, look, how are we thinking about this in terms of price, in terms of promotion, in terms of assortment, in terms of all of these different like lenses or types of expertise to understand it. And then usually we end up building things on top of it, more of orchestration layers of, hey, if I'm trying to do my category strategy, which of those different like types of input and best practice do I have to think about? And then what like data tooling do they need to use underneath it to be able to bring that answer forward? And the one thing I would say that's been changing a lot is I found I was using that structure quite a bit when I was building more chatbot based kind of interfaces. And
Mhm.
now I'm still doing that, but it's less of, purely just triaging what a person asks, but much more of AI native series of dashboards where it's, hey, here's how to understand what's going on today, still using those different agents for expertise to explain different parts and combinations of KPIs, then moving to, okay, let's figure out what's important, what's our strategy, what do we want to do, and then finally, what's like the execution output. Because I'm finding like you can get a lot of additional context almost for free when you're building that into the UI UX instead of depending on the user to type it all in a prompt every single time.
Yeah, I mean, are you like in these instances, like chatbot's a cool analogy, but are you doing anything as an interface that's machine to machine, like a data source that's dynamic, like the weather or something, or the temperature? Like, because all the, especially in the B2C world, those would have massive impacts
Yeah.
on potential consumption models.
I've seen a lot of it. I mean, I've seen a lot of it built. So, I mean, there really are a couple, like several different worlds, I'm sure. But there's the world of more deterministic machine learning models that I've seen for a long time, like on optimizing prices within, digitally within certain constraints, supply chain, things that you have a really clear objective function, you've got an approach, and you can add more data to it. That is absolutely where I'm seeing a lot of automation and ability to use additional data in ways you couldn't before, because almost for a couple of reasons. One, like I'm just finding like agentic approaches are so much more modular than it was before. And the development cycles and the speed to build, where before you might say, yeah, that information might be great, but is it really worth all that dev time to put it in and build it into the models? But now it's like, well, it's a little faster now, so it might be worth it. But I end up spending a lot of time in this more of art and science kind of decision making world where you're developing your category strategy in retail, or like an approach to figuring out consumers in healthcare, or you're doing your vendor negotiations. Now, some of those things, especially the last one, I hear people start to drift more to machine. Although I'm still finding that for a lot of the biggest retailers, biggest enterprises I'm working with, they're realizing they just get such better results from having human in the loop, augmented decision
Mhm.
making, just bringing all that data much faster, that it's actually like lowering the amount of time and human cost to be able to do those things. So they were thinking, oh, this will automate it away. But a lot of times they're finding, well, now I'm actually doing more category strategies and negotiating with smaller and smaller vendors because that cost is now lower because it's so much faster.
Yeah, I've seen
So
that
it's
a
been an
lot
interesting
with
dynamic.
us because I mean I seen like we used to do a lot of time building programs. Now I
Yeah,
spend a lot more time just doing program interrogation because the
yeah,
ability to build programs now is like light speed, right? But then you,
yeah.
to your point, unless there's a human in the loop, things can go awry, right? It's just like the measures, it doesn't make sense. Are we pissing anybody off?
Yeah.
That sort of
Well, and
sensitivity
that's
is
the other one
essential.
I found has been so interesting with the design process too, that I've had to be really careful, especially anytime I'm working with AI solutions for a brand new client or even a new user. They're kind of stunned by the technology and they're almost blinded to like the details of the mistake. So usually you'll show an initial prototype, show how it accesses the data. People are super amazed and impressed and like, wow, this is great. But then it takes a week or two from using it to go, you know what, these recommendations aren't quite right. These issues, I'd rather see it pull in a different way. Like, you just want to tune it a bit. But it's like you almost have to get people. I'm glad that we can build things so much faster, because getting over that kind of shock and awe of the initial solution takes a bit of time. And so having them see it early and then refine has been a very different approach than what I would have done years ago.
When you're building these models, do you build like a critic in the loop or a skeptic in the loop at all? Like, how do you, to give you that extra sort of filter to question every decision? Because
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of that. I mean, again, there's different ways that will end up like explaining it just to simplify like the
yeah,
structure of it I was talking about before. Because the way a lot of these systems will work is, orchestration to some best practice, grabbing some data, and then pulling that information back up. But we almost always build in different critics, guidelines, guardrails to be able to check and just make sure, like, to be able to like kick the tires and test on some of those answers that are coming forward. So yeah, that is absolutely like another part of like a critic in the loop, another like system just to be able to align to more overall best practice and just make sure you're keeping like the guardrails on the overall system.
so, I mean, you used an interesting term, best practice, and there's a lot
Yeah.
of controversy about the term best practice, just because it means you build to the mean, right? And ultimately, you begin to water your results because but you're not excelling and going above and beyond or breaking new ground. Like, how do you embrace that? Because you're not a mean kind of guy. You're like a new territories, go venture forth bravely kind of person.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's what you mean by it, because like you're right. I mean, and maybe I would split out like best practice of no, these are the only inputs that kind of box you in of what we do versus like principles and rules and ways of thinking that really matter. So for instance, what I'm really enjoying about these systems is like I'll just go back to like price and promotion in retail, like I was talking before. Like being able now to quickly check, hey, am I still having better pack, better value? Am I still, having breadth before depth in terms of new products and how I'm thinking about it? That was really hard to build into those old systems, and you have to teach someone to kind of remember and remind it. Having those kind of reminders is super helpful, and it's really great having in agentic systems. But when I say like building in best practice, I think one of the worst things I've seen people do is say, oh, well, we've defined the workflow. We're going to build our solution around it. And I think anyone that's tried to build anything in big organizations, you realize there is not one workflow. Every user, every person has their own way of doing things, and they're not wrong. There's a lot of value in the way they figured out how to build that over time. So you have to be able to build enough flex and also trust that you can build in systems where, hey, if you want to work on the data in Excel, be able to pull it out and mess with it a little bit and build it in different systems. Like, let's talk about why you couldn't stay within the platform, but you don't want to use best practice in a way that hems in creativity, adding new data, adding new thinking, because that's where I think it gets dangerous. So maybe there's like a difference between those
Yeah.
two worlds that people use it in both ways.
Well, I mean, because given your math background, you're a quant for sure. And data is so important to interpret, right? And best practice is sometimes, oh, let's just make sure we follow this. But you
Yeah.
must be looking at your data extensively and looking for variants and anomalies constantly, because that's where a lot of the gold is.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. And that's where it doesn't replace some of those processes of interrogating the data, figuring out anomalies, like finding like some new things, because you just can't design around everything that could possibly, come in the future. So it really doesn't replace like that sort of model. I just see a lot of opportunities of being able to see all of the great ways people are working with data, all of the new inputs and insights they're putting in. And I don't even just mean that in terms of the quant structured data. Like I've been, doing a lot within like these retail systems of yes, there's things that you can learn from the metrics and math, but if you're really trying to understand like price perception of a shelf, a photo of the shelf is really helpful. Like there's things that you can see. Well, no, really. I mean, because like that's why you do store walks and everything.
Yeah.
And so what I'm finding what's been really exciting about these AI systems, we used to, oh, let's do the quant. Now we'll go do the more subjective, qualitative thinking about what's going on. And now we can train these models to think about those subjective other points. Like, you know what, maybe I am overranged on higher end items, and that's what's driving price perception in a way that the competitive benchmarking, the optimization models just aren't showing me. And so I don't know, I found like those aspects of it to be really fun to add more of that like data around the art and how you see things because of the flexibility of what even like data means between principles and guidelines, best practice, pictures, videos, like how people are reacting is just really more able to be integrated than it was before.
So, I mean, you raise some cool points, especially in the B2C world. Like all these stores have cameras of all the people looking at shelves. Is that going to be the future interpreting those feeds, or is it going to be robots going around looking at the shelves, see what's picked, wasn't inventory systems? Like,
No,
what does that
I
look
don't know.
like?
It's been fascinating to me because there's been so much like great development in taking pictures and videos of things of shelves. But again, it's like it's strangely not integrated into decisioning systems for now. So a lot of times when I've been building some of these things, I'm like, hey, look, if you just go take a photo with your phone of a shelf and we'll build it into the system. And now I'm starting to see folks more and more use the technology that they've started to build in stores in other ways. But we still have an environment where folks have kind of put one dashboard set of insights on every data silo we have in the organization, even store visualizations included. So, and I think that's something that's starting to get broken down very, very quickly. But whether that means they're going to use existing cameras, people will take pictures in the moment, whether they'll have robots running around, I don't feel like I know yet.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess the bleeding edge is Whole Foods, right? With their walk in, walk out stores, and just
Yeah, but even then it's used for, mostly for the transactions other places. I'm not quite sure exactly how much they're using it in insights and systems, but a lot of the ones I have, even if they're using that kind of technology, it's still not always integrated into like merchandising decisions, price and promo, like how you're thinking about it, but it's starting to very, very quickly. And I'm sure there's folks out there listening that probably are building like on that way right now. I'm just saying I've seen it just emerging, that more broad thinking about what you can get out of data and using the broadest definition of data that includes unstructured information into those more traditional structured data optimization model only kind of decisions.
Yeah, I'm actually very excited about the next sort of shoe to drop with, robotics being a lot more involved in our lives.
Yeah.
And, well, as in San Francisco, is just cool to see the Waymos going everywhere. That's kind of in, Tesla's about to launch they already have fleets, I think, in Austin going with their taxis.
Yeah.
And my wife works in healthcare, and it's just interesting to see how the number of robots cruising around hospitals now is just increasing year over year over year. And I think it's, I can see that in the B2C experience for sure in the stores for
Well, in
stocking
certain parts
shelves.
it has been, right? So a lot of supply chain warehouses, that part, we've been seeing that for quite a while. I think now it's, potentially maybe starting to move to more customer interactions in other places, but that's still a world that is really emerging and developing as far as, well, how do you actually get it onto the shop floor, engaging with consumers and others? I mean, there's like pilots and prototypes out there, but that part hasn't hit its scale. It's been much more of, hey, how do we use robotics in very controlled, in a lot of ways, lower risk environments than when you have them directly with people. But given everything you're seeing that's going on, I mean, it feels like a matter of time.
So, Brock, I'd love to get your thoughts just on, what is the set of rubrics or common rubrics that you use every day to help fulfill like your goals and mission? And because the one thing that I always enjoyed about our conversations is you always talk about experiments and a thesis. And that's like everything you do is based on a thesis or an idea that you have to validate and prove. Is that like basically how do you leverage your day every day, or what else are you looking at from a rubric perspective to help define your outcomes?
Yeah, and even when you're saying that, I'm trying to think of which elements you're talking about, because I find I've used it a lot like, hey, does this approach, technique, model, how do we improve it work for that kind of experimentation? But also a lot with just like some of this technology in general. Because I don't know, I feel like when I look online or hear like a lot of folks talk, they talk about like what like agentic should be able to do and what these reasoning models could do or anything else. And I find it's technology. Like you can play around with it and see exactly what it can do and not, and like push the edges of it. So I've just found this has been, well, in a lot of ways, the tools are far more accessible than they used to be in other places. Like I remember, early days when I was doing data science with like, Kroger on big data models, we would say, hey, does the segmentation work? Have to run code overnight and wait a day and get something back, and then maybe go test it in stores. And now it's, hey, I've got an idea that maybe this visualization could look good. I can, code it up very quickly, figure out, hey, how do I split up the different agents to get that decision? What would work? And you can just see if things work, then see, well, is it effective when it's actually deployed with users? And then does it actually drive value and is meaningful for, for the business and for customers in a much, much quicker way than you ever could before? I still do try to spend a lot of time testing each of those. It's probably those three different layers. Like, hey, does it like technically work? Can you technically do it? Does it actually work for a user? Is it something that someone can engage with and get, really like augment their decision making? And then did all of that add value? Did you actually prove ROI, uplift in sales and loyalty for customers or anything else? And maybe that's kind of the different levels of experimentation I find I like to do a lot.
Do you do a lot of different sample testing, for example, in that go-to-market? Is that part of the rubric?
I mean, especially lately as I've been doing more like within consulting, it's more of like within a, hey, we think there's like a there and an idea. And then when we're going to market, hey, let's run this for one division, a handful of stores, a certain set of users. So it's really more of does this work for users? There's some testing of, let's find some people that are interested in trying and experimenting with these kind of new interfaces and ways of engaging with data and insights. And then also like, well, let's go test in a handful of stores or one division or one area, depending on, are we really trying to test if the decisions are better, or if we're trying to test, does this overall process like drive improvements? Because sometimes you kind of have to take like a whole area of a decision set versus like experimenting in certain places.
Yeah. I guess, and the point is, I guess, validating, will it scale? Did this data set solve for actually being useful across markets, and solve for the assumptions?
Yeah,
So
for sure.
cool. So talk to me a bit about like, who helped you get to where you are? I'm always interested to who, what people or what programs really help shape you, to make you the executive you are today.
I mean, I feel like I learned a ton, and I was very lucky to work for dunnhumby and have a lot of great mentors there. One of the folks that even interviewed me when I was joining dunnhumby was like Mark Hines, and he was like set up a lot in the US and then worked with him a lot in Tesco International. And I think just, and even with like Clive and Edwina, the founders of dunnhumby were great around that, being incredibly focused on consumers, learning to collaborate with retailers and their supply and CPGs and their suppliers. It's an interesting relationship, and it was actually quite new when we were doing it to go in between them and say, hey, we're going to work all together to really focus on the customer. But when you have that kind of like mission driven collaboration kind of model, like, I don't know, that's something that's really stuck with me for a long time, where I'm like, hey, even if these companies or businesses or different stakeholders couldn't collaborate, if we've got the right mission, we can. But then also I felt like I had so many opportunities early in my career to just have to make new things. Like, because me and one other person would, early in my career sent out to Thailand and, hey, let's figure out how to do what they've been doing with hundreds of people in the UK and in the US with just a handful of us, and still like a big market, complicated customers in that too. Yeah, you learn to be very pragmatic. You learn to program a lot at night. Like after meetings during the day, and just like how to just make sure you like really get things done. And I learned a lot from that experience. And then I found when I was going more into consulting, learning like, hey, how to take analogous situations. So how to take the techniques and the approaches and the principles you learned in one industry and apply it to other ones or even cross industries. Because there's a lot that, I would learn from retail that I took to working with, on consumer behavior and how to model retention, that I then took to streaming platforms that were really complicated. And we were trying to figure out the values of shows. But then we're like, hey, you know what? Healthcare plans by different counties and markets and all the different features of like you can offer to members, like what really drives retention or not. Like using a lot of like what you kind of learned in other places and realizing what you have to experiment to, bring new solutions to an industry that are analogous from other ones where you've proven it.
So you talk about like really understanding pricing, what's driving the motivation to buy. While we were in San Francisco, we talked about how like the usage models are beginning to change. You see a real shift in B2C usage models, or is it just pricing precision and personalization and localization to get the consumer to buy, and maybe some variance in price just based on an environmental situation? Or is there going to be outcome-based pricing or unit-based pricing? I know it's a big question, because in healthcare, there could be outcome-based pricing based on if you stay healthy, maybe you don't get charged anything, but that's really hard to measure. But in a traditional, like buying something at a store, is that going to change, or is it just the personalization and understanding the customer that's going to make it so targeted and beneficial, or allow that transaction to happen much faster for a seller?
Yeah, I mean, for me, a lot of where I've been excited about seeing things go more towards usage models hasn't been so much on like the B2C or retail side, but on the technology, AI, like insights and LLMs, and hopefully soon, as I'm starting to see more and more on the data side as well. Because one thing that I found through a lot of my career was there's so many opportunities to bring in additional data and information. However, the way it was monetized in the past, where you would either send over a bulk send of like raw data, or you would build like services around it, or like have to design dashboards and products that would really have to solve an end-to-end use case to get any value, just left so much value for certain very valuable data sets just on the table because you just couldn't expose it in the right way. And I haven't seen this come yet, but I've been, doing some things that are just starting to emerge around, well, if you can build these different agents, MCPs, different tooling and structures on top of that data, can you start to license it out very specifically for different moments in usage? And I'm seeing a lot of people start to build in that way. And for me, that's really exciting, because I'm going, that if you could integrate it into these AI assistants and into workflows directly, you can solve the commercial model problems of the bulk licensing. You can solve the awareness of the user needing to know, hey, I actually should be looking at this data in the moment, and solve a lot of the training needs where you had to teach someone, hey, this is
Mhm.
how to think about that data set and how to use it in this context and everything else. And that I think is just opening up so many opportunities in data, like monetization and delivering insights that were just not possible because of the state of previous technology and the way we used to think about data commercial models. But again, I think
Yeah.
it's really emerging. I haven't seen it a whole lot yet, but I think it's coming, and I've been excited to start to work in that way.
Yeah, and also I just think that the price of, tokens is going to come down massively, which will massively enable this data scrubbing and analysis for a lot of this old stuff that, probably has tons of gems in it that, we haven't realized.
Well, for sure. And then even, I mean, I've been kind of thinking of it in like a lot of the retail ecosystem, but even the AI ecosystem overall, I think we've seen some really big changes in the mental model of how people are thinking about selling their data for AI training, AI referencing, building different products on top of it. Because I think at first people didn't really know the full value that they were commercializing when they were allowing their data to be trained on. And then
Mhm.
you saw this like this summer, really, like a big pullback from a lot of the places that were saying, hey, crawl our websites, you can have this data, or we'd say like one lump sum, to be able to access it. And now we're starting to see as those contracts are getting renegotiated, even for these broader consumer AI trends, people are saying, hey, I need some cut to grow with you on referencing and citations. Because otherwise, this isn't going to work. Like we're just trying to negotiate the entire value up front. And that's not a great way to have a partnership model.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Especially like we have tons of data, years and years of pricing and computation and configuration data. But
Yeah.
I mean, it is, yeah, very, very interesting to understand from a consumer perspective. So I know we're getting near our time, but one of the things that I always try to pivot on is, there's lots of kids entering the marketplace thinking about going to university or graduating university. One of the challenges I have with my kids is, sometimes it's better for an external person to give them my advice so they'll listen to it.
Yeah.
So what would you want to have someone tell your kid, when they're at that stage?
Yeah, my kids are getting older too now. Like they're starting to get
Yeah.
towards college, and we talk about this a lot. I mean, I think the values of being very curious, willing to experiment, trying to build new things in that are just always going to be valuable. So I would get very nervous if my kid or hear from anyone now going into the market saying, hey, this is a very specific skill set I'm going to learn and how to do. I'm just going to learn how to, program or work in this very like type defined way, but realize the value is going to be how you're able to use technology, how you're able to be creative even outside of technology, different spaces. It
Mhm.
is still going to be incredibly valuable. And then also, I do have the privilege of working with a lot of new grads from like consulting and also in like technology and that. And the other thing is just know that, look, you're going to enter what you're learning in school, especially now, if you're learning the latest of what's going on in tech. When you go to these companies, they might not be aware that you can do things in far more efficient ways. And this space is moving fast. In a lot of ways, I find new grads are on the forefront of it. I wish they'd be less quiet about it. Like, you know what I mean? I think there's just opportunities where you go
Yes.
and go, why are you structuring your data this way? Why are you trying to
Yeah.
build your A models like this? And they know. And I'm like, oh, come on. And they have to grab them aside and go, I know this is crazy too, right? And
Yeah.
they're like, yeah. And then it opens up, but it's like I wish they'd be more vocal about what they're learning and
Yeah.
realize that some of these institutions haven't kept up to the latest that you just learned in
Yeah.
school.
Build the skunk works because they're way faster to build now too. So
Oh, well, you say that though too. That's another one I've seen really limit a lot of these organizations. They get so into AI governance and making sure things are perfect and everything else. They have no, like, they don't carve out, hey, yeah, something that's going to our customers and consumers, tons of governance. You need to have that right. But it's okay to have a playground. It's okay to have somewhere where you can experiment and just test out the latest in open source or other places. I've just worked with a lot of big organizations that treat everything with the same exact governance levels. And I'm like, how are you going to keep up with the latest like wrappers on top of like agentic protocols and what's coming out with the latest models? Like, you're never going to do that as one single institution. So you have to have some places to experiment. And I just find that is sorely lacking right now in a lot of big enterprises.
yeah, I mean, on that note, I mean, you've managed to embrace some models and have some good depth to your knowledge with them. What is your new renewal model when you look at technology? Because the rate of change is so fast now, you could be renewing every day almost. But
Yeah.
at some point, you have to get work done and then, renew as you go. Like, how does Bain think about that? How do you guys think about that?
Well, I mean, I don't know how to speak for like Bain overall as a lot of people, but at
Yeah.
least for me, I think you really can't let the fear of like what's coming next just keep you from solving the problem and the things that you have today. And, and I go through this a lot with, hey, trying to set up, just for example, like these different agentic frameworks. I'll get a lot of feedback of, well, if the reasoning models gets better, it'll be able to hold more information at once. So do you need actually this kind of structure? I go, sure. But you know what? If I still am building AI tooling on top of these data sets, if I'm building the right UI, UX, getting people used to using the system, I'm building a structure that works today. If some of these agents collapse into one, cool, fine. Like, you know what I mean? It's just, I think people overthink that too much and don't realize, hey, let's take what we have today, in terms of the dashboards, techniques, and models. Let's build on top of that, push the edges of what we can do with the technology as it stands, and just recognize, look, in the future, yeah, we might be able to condense and build things a little bit differently later. And that is fine. You still made progress in terms of users and technology and data architecture.
Yeah, because we see a lot of flip-flop and just, and one of my favorite quotes is, perfection is the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good enough LLMs out there to solve a lot of really hard problems. And I just think, as long as you have a renewal factor built into your model, like, hey, every 6 months, let's just test the water to see, is there a dramatic lift if we change something? But otherwise, let's just keep improving because, if your quality is going up, your metrics and your numbers are going up and are going in the right direction, and you have a renewal step to make you're still on the right path, I think that's
Well, and most of these tech providers, like the new processes around evals and things that you can build in to keep it constantly learning and avoiding data drift and everything else have really come a long way than what it was before. And that's also, I'm finding, like, if you're on the edge of it, like everyone's kind of experiencing like the next wall and the same problem at the same time. And then you find, oh, look, someone invented something and it's like they're adding that as a feature and you can build on top of it. So I find a lot of those problems, do kind of fade away quite quickly.
So I know there'll be a lot of people saying, hey, Brock's a smart guy, and I'd love to figure out how we could talk to him. Like, what kind of projects are you working on? How could people engage with you? Like, what are you doing these days?
Yeah, working on quite a few different things, but like the easiest way for me is like, reach out on LinkedIn and everything else. Like I'm, fairly available. Yeah. And I also really do love to hear from people that are thinking in this way and building this. Like I found as I've been talking about this more and meeting folks like yourself and others that kind of see, hey, these technology changing, the commercial models changing, like what we can do with insights and everything else is like changing fast. I really enjoy talking to different folks about what they're seeing in their space and ideas. So yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out. And then I guess more specifically, what I've been working a lot on is I've done a lot in different industries. I've gone back to retail very specifically because I spent so much time in it. And I'm like, it used to take a long time to do assortment decisions and customer decision trees manually. I hated it. Guess what? We don't have to do that anymore. Let's go back and build around it, like stuff like that. So I've really gotten into retail. I've also been very excited about like data monetization space of how do we unleash the data for things like AI training and referencing, but also for these different use cases and building in new ways. Yeah, I think those are the two ones. So if it's like, people want to talk about, opportunities to build AI into retail decisioning or like this data monetization space, I would really love to hear from people on that.
Awesome. Well, with that, Brock, it's been awesome. And we'll put your contact details so people can follow up with you and also follow what you're doing because I know you share a lot. But yeah, in closing, I mean, the only constant is change, and the rate of change is, is what I read, what some quote like yesterday is like, or today is the slowest day you're going to experience for the rest of your life. And that velocity I've never felt more than, the current state. It's exciting and terrifying sometimes, but I'm more excited than I am terrified. So
yeah, no, I've been the same way. I know there's a lot of people that are scared, but I find this to be such an exciting time. If there's things that you kind of had problems with before, wanted to build, do new things, it's such an innovative time right now. And it's
well, to your point, it allows us to do things that we've been talking about forever that we've never been able to get around to. Like for us to begin to think about getting to our feature backlog like that.
For sure. Yeah. It's really great. And yeah, Daniel, thank you so much for having me and to talking with me about this. I enjoyed our conversations over the last few weeks and this one as well. So thank you.
Awesome. Cheers.